Welcome to my PowerPoint. I hope you find this well. Today we'll be talking about how IQ is measured and what are some criticisms into the idea of IQ as intelligence. So what is intelligence and IQ? Intelligence is such a complicated piece of material where there is no single universal definition. It has multiple theories, so defining it has difficulties. Intelligence may be defined as an individual's mental capacity to adapt to new situations or environments, ability to understand complex concepts, problem solving, and critical thinking skills. In comparison, IQ may be defined as intelligence tests which are widely recognized and used to measure an individual's intelligence. Now, how do we measure IQ? Alfred Binet actually formulated the first intelligence test to assess mental skills of schoolchildren. From this launched the modern intelligence testing movement. His assumptions entail that individuals' mental abilities develop with age, and the rate in which individuals gain mental competence becomes a characteristic and usually remains constant over time. This test involves a standardized interview with an adult examiner who poses a series of questions testing whether a child is performing at the correct mental age. A clear example to help you understand this test is to imagine you're interviewing a 5-year-old, but after a series of questions into the child's intellectual performance, you calculate that they have the mental age of 8. This discovery may benefit the child. Where they may have a higher mental age than peers, the content may be too simplistic for them. So setting them high standard work may actually stimulate and challenge them. Following this, Stern decided to expand this concept mental age to provide a relative score. He formulated an equation in which IQ was mental age divided by chronological age multiplied by 100. For instance, a child whose performance is at the same mental age level would have an IQ of 100, but a child who was 5 and had a mental age of 8 would have an IQ score of 160. Though this is useful for children, it's less so for adults due to basic and intelligent skills being adopted and a range of mental age increases. For instance, a 29-year-old with the mental age of a 63-year-old would mean an IQ score of 217. It's unrealistic and is based more so on performance of age group rather than individual intelligence. Continuing on, Lewis Terman revised Binet's test and formulated the Stanford-Binet test. This test was actually very popular in the US Army before the World War. It was mainly a verbal test and collected single IQ scores. Terman and his student Otis created a group-administered test for intellectual ability. As said, it was a verbally orientated task, and for those who were unable to successfully participate in verbal tasks, there was a non-verbal test, involving mazes, digits, and picture completion problems. Individuals who were able to score higher when analysing patterns were seen to have a higher IQ. The test was largely used in the Army and was further adapted for use in education systems. The Stanford-Binet test was a prototype for the US Army to test large amounts of recruits for intellectual fitness. More than 1.7 million were screened and actually led to the development of other tests like the Otis Lennon School Ability Test. Moving on, another form of IQ measurement is the Wechsler scales. He first developed 4 measurements before they were finally reviewed and used in the present day. The adult intelligence scales are used on 16 to 19-year-olds, and the intelligence scale for children is used for 6 to 16-year-olds. He believes intelligence should measure different mental abilities, and so the adult intelligence scale provides an IQ score based on 4 subcategories: verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. Each category included their own test. Once the scores from each test was collected, they were plotted to produce profiles. These profiles indicated the IQ score. However, as useful as these IQ tests may seem, there are critics. Some researchers argue that IQ may not actually represent intelligence, but instead motivation. Research suggests that it may be motivation that drives decision making, reasoning, and information processing, rather than individuals' intelligence. Motivations may actually be the result of cognitive performance in IQ tests. For instance, mindsets of growth are more likely to score higher on an IQ test as they are willing to search new information, whereas someone with a more closed-minded mindset would score lower due to a lack of willingness to search. This negatively impacts the idea of IQ being a valid representation of intelligence, as it may really be measuring individuals' motivations. Reliability and validity are a cause for concern with the idea of IQ as intelligence. Validity is simply whether the test is measuring what it intends to. Researchers argue whether IQ tests are valid. How can you test a concept that cannot be universally conceptualized if it's not clear what intelligence is? It's not clear what intelligence tests measure, or as said, is it really testing motivations instead of intelligence? Researchers may interpret results differently as well. This is known as interviewer bias. Reliability is whether repeated measures produce consistent scores. However, uncontrollable environmental factors play a role in this. For instance, a participant at the time of the test may have a headache or did not get enough sleep. This interrupts their cognitive function, meaning that their IQ score may not reflect the individual's true intelligence, but instead their impaired one. It may mean that the idea of IQ as intelligence lacks reliability and validity to be accepted. Moreover, some researchers argue that there are discriminatory issues involved with IQ tests. Many use standardized US tests. However, all participants, regardless of race or culture, participated. It may mean in these IQ tests that minorities were discriminated. Those who have English as their first language and recognize these standardized tests are more likely to have a higher cognitive performance than those who struggle with the language. It may mean that they are seen as less intelligent due to a lower score in the IQ test, but may not actually be a true reflection of their intelligence. If the test was in their language, they may have scored higher. The role of environment becomes an issue again. It's suggested that genetics play a significant part in our intelligence. However, genetics can be altered throughout our lives due to many external factors like trauma or viruses, etc. It may mean that a child with a higher IQ score may be labelled as an overachiever. However, as they age, the genes may alter, resulting in a lower cognitive performance. In education settings, it may mean that the workload becomes too overwhelming, resulting in failure, and does not really reflect the individual's intelligence. IQ tests assume the score remains consistent. This may not realistically be the case. Cultural deprivation and disadvantages are also a critique of IQ as intelligence. Minorities who may have a background of cultural deprivation, for instance living in areas of poor educational systems and support systems. Those who are unable to afford resources to further their studies are less likely to develop higher cognitive performance due to the lack of stimulation compared to those who are not deprived and had all resources available. When testing both disadvantaged and advantaged participants with the same test, you may only be testing this gap rather than intelligence. If those disadvantaged are minorities who may have scored a lower IQ score had availability to those resources, would they have scored higher? IQ tests fail to consider this. Here is a summary of everything we have gone over today. I'd like to finish this leaving you with a thought. How would you feel to be labelled with a score that insinuates your intelligence based on a standardized test? What do you feel should be done to help improve this and further the research into intelligence? Here are the references for today. Thank you for taking the time to listen.